The definition of mad varies depending how you're viewing the story. Were they crazy, medically insane, or just lonely? Or were they just masochistic and needed to stay far away from positions of power as much as possible? Hi, my name is Jessa, and please join me as we look together top 10 mad monarchs who sat on the British throne. Oh, and before we begin, in the last video I was in, top 10 bizarre Greek mythology stories we still can't explain, I gave you guys a riddle. Did you get it? The riddle was, what has 88 keys? The answer is, drumroll please, a piano. Your next riddle will be at the end of this video. Anyways, let's get started. Number 10. Queen Mary I. Bloody Mary, as she is noted, is actually acclaimed as a heroic underdog that became a monarch and was then mythologized as a violent despot despite being no bolder than her father, King Henry VIII. Despite being the daughter of King Henry VIII and Catherine of Aragon, she was turned from princess to lady and was separated from her mother when her father left her for Anne Boleyn. When Mary was able to ascend to the throne, it was during her 5-year reign that Mary navigated challenges as her status as the first English queen. She, like Elizabeth I, who would reign after her, wanted to focus on wearing the crown to rule rather than being the wife to a king. She prioritized religion above all else, implementing reforms and restrictions aimed at restoring the Catholic Church in England. Most controversially, she ordered 280 Protestants burned at the stake as heretics, a fact that would later cement her as the reputation as Bloody Mary. These executions, the main reason for her unfortunate nickname, are cited as justifications for her labeling her one of the most evil humans of all time and even depicting her as a flesh-eating zombie. They are where we get to the image of a monarch whose raging madness and open tyranny. She was stubborn, inflexible, and undoubtedly flawed, but she was the product of her time and as incomprehensible to modern minds as our world would be to hers. But like all older sisters, she did pave the way to help her younger sister, Elizabeth I, who would be noted to be the most powerful ruler England would ever see. Number 9. King Stephen. King Stephen is one of those monarchs that many people are unaware of. Although he had firm morals, he proved to be a bad king during his reign in 1135 to 1154. Leading an expedition to Normandy, his campaign ended in failure and he was forced to make peace in exchange for expensive annuity. His cousin, Empress Matilda, called for the throne, but instead of dealing with her, he let her go, where she would grow a number of supporters and a rebellion that would aid her in the future. When they fought, the country broke into anarchy. While Stephen was ruling as a monarch, his personality changed in comparison to his predecessor. Records of having him rather warm personality and an inability to make tough decisions inevitably led to chaos during his reign, as the nobility were able to exploit his weak leadership for their own gain. In the days of the king, there was nothing but strife, evil, and robbery, for quickly the great man who were traitors rose against him, and many greedy barons took advantage of this time. Number 8. King Henry VIII. Typically, he would be mentioned here as he was known to marry, smash, and dash in order to find someone to birth him a son. Even throughout his rule, he still kept this ruthless behavior, as King Henry VIII ordered the death of roughly 52,000 to 72,000 English people through the capital punishment during his 38-year reign, many of whom were either members of the clergy or ordinary citizens and nobles who had taken part in uprisings and protests up and down the country. Victims of the king's reign were either executed by him or killed in his name. In the case instance of Catherine, his first wife, she too was too old to bear any more kids, which is why he married Anne Boleyn. It was reasonable enough for him to break off from the church and make his own. Of course, the people loyal to the church did not approve of this and had heavy criticism of the king's decision, as he would constantly marry, behead, and remarry every woman who came along claiming they could birth him a son. Number 7. Richard II. Son of the Black Prince Edward III, Richard II became king at age 10, so a series of regency councils governed England by his side. Richard was 14 years old when his government brutally repressed the peasants and revolt of 1381. Along with a volatile court full of powerful men wrestling for influence, Richard inherited the 100 Years' War with France. With war comes with taxes, and it was already a heavy blow on England that was already suffering with financial interests, and after the poll tax, the peasants revolted against landowners. Although he did let go of the majority, the 14-year-old sought execution to the rebel leaders. When he finally was of age, he sought retribution for his counselors previously for their betrayals, thus manifesting a series of dramatic executions, including his own uncle. Even though he sent Henry Bolingbroke into exile, Henry would then come back to overthrow him in 1399, where he was crowned King Henry IV due to popular demand. Number 6. King Henry VI. I think this might be the youngest monarch on record, as King Henry VI became king when he was only 9 months old. As a young king, he was surrounded by many advisors whom spoiled the young king with riches, titles, and so on, which upsetted other nobles. The young king split his decision and his opinions when he married the French king's niece-in-law Margaret, ceding hard-won territories in France. With the unsuccessful French campaign in Normandy, the increasing divide between the factions of the threat of Richard, Duke of York's popularity, the King Henry VI fell into mental health issues and suffered a major mental breakdown in 1453. Because of this, during the War of Roses, Henry struggled with control as he was in little position to take up leadership, especially after his loss of his son. The King Henry IV took over, imprisoned the two monarchs with Marjorie in chains parading through London, and Henry in the Tower where he died. Number 5. Richard III. Noted as England's most malignant monarch, Richard came into the throne after his brother Edward IV. Edward's kids were suddenly named illegitimate, and so Richard III stepped in as king with the support of the other advocates like Duke of Buckingham. When he came into rule, he exhibited some of the desirable traits of a medieval ruler, taking a stance against his brother's rampant and public adultery and pledging to improve the court. Seems pretty legit, right? Well, despite these good intentions, they were overshadowed by mysterious disappearance of his nephews in August 1483. Although there is a little evidence that points to this involvement, as noted with the Princess in the Tower, the fact Richard was placed on the throne after Edward's indictment was enough of a conversation to strike. Number 4. William IV. In many ways, William IV was originally the Mad Lad. Despite never expected to take the throne, William IV proceeded to become the most unconventional king Britain has ever seen. During the American Revolution, he was fighting in the fields in honor of his father, King George III, but he was also hanging around unprotected in Manhattan window shopping. And when the American troops heard of this, they thought about kidnapping him, and George Washington approved it. But British forces heard of this plan, and now they made sure to assign guards to him at all times. But aside almost being kidnapped, as soon as he was declared king, he felt being a sailor was more fun, and he tried to give away Buckingham Palace multiple times. He tried to give it away to the British Army as a high-class barracks, and they said no. Even tried turning it into the new parliament after the old one burnt down, and they also said no. Even as a sailor, he was terrible, as he was fired after he went and played hooky, commandeered a squander of ships, and didn't return for 10 days. And despite being dumb in his youth, he did have some sense to ensure his niece Victoria would take the crown after he died, just 1 month after her 18th birthday, so her mother wouldn't be Queen Regent, who he didn't like. Number 3. King George III. We know during the American Revolution the essence of King George III was noted as the Mad King of this time, mainly because of how insane he was, taxing the people to death for expenses that were impossible to maintain. However, despite that, King George III was also showing signs of mental illness around 1763, pretty early on. Some medical historians believe George's illness was actually characterized by hallucinations, paranoia, general breakdowns, and abdominal pains, which was caused by an enzyme disorder, porphyria. For a retroactive diagnosis is debatable. When the American Revolution began in April 1775, and the next year with Declaration of Independence, the demands for America's freedom showcased and dictated King George III as an inflexible tyrant who has squandered his right to govern the colonies. In reality, the situation was actually more complex. It wasn't just George in charge, but in fact the parliamentary ministers who were responsible for the colonial policies. Though, through George had means of direct and indirect influences, and King George died blind and deaf and mad on January 28, 1820. Number 2. King Edward II. Not in the sense of insanity, but his arrogant lawlessness and his close association with greedy uncles increased King Edward II's popularity among the English, or actually decreased the popularity. He was actually entirely unconventional by the standards of his time. Edward's reign was a disaster. He was unsuited to the position into which he was born and had left a very difficult legacy by his father, enormous debts, an unwinnable war in Scotland, dissatisfied magnates, and hostile relations with the powerful France. Damn. Consequently, Edward's reign lurched from one crisis to another, endless conflicts with his barons, constant threats of civil war, and failed military campaigns in Scotland. Edward was forced to abdicate to his throne to his 14-year-old son Edward III, and it was the first time this had ever happened in England. Number 1. John I. The legend of Robin Hood is based on the chaos during the reign of King John of England during the 13th century. The reign of King John is a salutary reminder that death and treachery may possibly be forgiven in a monarch, but not the incompetence. John was the youngest and favorite son of Henry II, but he had not been entrusted with any lands and was mockingly nicknamed John Lackland. He tried unsuccessfully to seize power while his brother Richard I was away on crusade and was sent to exile upon Richard's return. On his accession, John had his own nephew Arthur deceased, and he embarked on a disastrous war with the King of France in which he lost the whole of Normandy. This singular act of incompetence deprived the barons of an important part of their power base, and he alienated them further with arbitrary demands for money and even by forcing himself on their wives. In exasperation, they forced him to accept Magna Carta no sooner than he sealed it. However, then he went back on his word and plunged the country into a maelstrom of war and the French invasion. So, who was your favorite on your list? Did you learn anything interesting today? Let me know. Oh yeah, your next riddle. Are you ready? I love to dance and twist. I shake my tail as I sail away. When I fly wingless into the sky, what am I? Be sure to put your answer in the comments below, and I'll reveal the answer in the next video, Top 10 Evil Doctors Who Perform Disturbing Experiments. That's all for today. Thank you for joining me. My name is Jessa. Be sure to like and subscribe, and I'll see your beautiful faces in the next one. Bye-bye!